There is a moment that doesn't announce itself with noise. It doesn't arrive with applause or chaos. It comes quietly, often when you're alone, often when nothing dramatic is happening at all. It's the moment you realize you can't keep living like this, not because everything is broken on the outside, but because something inside you has finally stopped pretending. You wake up one morning and the routine feels heavier than usual. The same thoughts repeat themselves. The same promises you made to yourself last year and the year before echo back with no evidence to support them. And suddenly the truth becomes impossible to ignore. This is the moment of realization. It's not about failure, it's about awareness. Most people don't change because they don't see a reason to. They adjust, they tolerate, they normalize things that once felt wrong. Humans are remarkably good at adapting, even to lives that slowly drain them. We learn how to function inside misalignment. We learn how to smile while something inside us quietly withers. At first, it's subtle. You tell yourself it's just a phase. You convince yourself that everyone feels this way. You distract yourself with busyness, with noise, with other people's expectations. And for a while that works, until one day it doesn't. Because awareness has a way of stacking up. Every small disappointment, every ignored instinct, every compromise you made that moved you further away from who you are, it all accumulates. And then one day, something small happens, something insignificant, and it breaks the illusion. That's when you realize the problem isn't the job or the schedule or the people. The problem is that you've been living out of alignment with what you know to be true. And the hardest part about this realization is that it removes your ability to lie to yourself. Before awareness, you can pretend. After awareness, pretending becomes painful. You start noticing patterns. You see how long you've been postponing your own growth. You recognize the excuses you repeat, not because they're true, but because they're familiar. I don't have time. I'll do it later. This isn't the right moment. It could be worse. But deep down, you know those are not reasons. They're shields. They protect you from discomfort. They protect you from risk. They protect you from the responsibility of becoming who you say you want to be. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Comfort is often the enemy of change. Not comfort as ease, but comfort as predictability. Knowing what tomorrow looks like, even if you don't like it, can feel safer than stepping into uncertainty. So we stay, we wait, we tolerate, we convince ourselves that stability is the same as fulfillment, but your body knows the difference. Your energy knows the difference. Your sense of purpose knows the difference. That's why the realization doesn't come from logic alone. It comes from feeling, from exhaustion, from the quiet frustration of knowing you're capable of more but not acting on it. This moment isn't about judging yourself for where you are. It's about being honest about where you've settled, because realization is not meant to shame you. It's meant to wake you up, and waking up can be uncomfortable. You start asking questions you've avoided. Why am I here? Why do I keep choosing this? Why am I giving my best energy to things that don't move me forward? These questions don't demand immediate answers. They demand courage. Courage to sit with uncertainty instead of rushing back to distraction. Courage to admit that some of the choices you made were driven by fear, not purpose. And that's okay. Awareness doesn't mean you failed. It means you've grown enough to see clearly. But here's the danger. Many people reach this moment and then turn away from it. They feel the discomfort and rush to numb it. They go back to scrolling, to overworking, to overcommitting. Anything to avoid the responsibility that awareness brings. Because once you see, you're accountable. You can't unknow what you know. You can't unfeel what you feel, and you can't blame ignorance anymore. This is where enough is born. Not as a decision that says, I can't keep betraying myself, a decision that says, this isn't who I want to be 5 years from now, a decision that says, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And that realization is powerful because it reframes everything. Your past stops being something you regret and starts becoming evidence. Evidence of what happens when you ignore your inner voice. Evidence of what you no longer want to repeat. Evidence that you've learned enough to choose differently. This moment doesn't require a full plan. It doesn't require confidence. It doesn't even require action yet. It requires honesty. Honesty about what's no longer working. Honesty about where you've been settling. Honesty about the cost of staying the same. Because staying the same has a cost. It costs time. It costs energy. It costs potential. And once you truly see that cost, you begin to understand that change isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. The realization is not the end. D of the story, it's the beginning of responsibility. It's the moment you stop asking, what happened to me, and start asking, what am I going to do about it? That's when everything shifts. Not because your life has changed yet, but because you have. And when that happens, staying the same becomes impossible. After the moment of realization comes something far more uncomfortable to confront: the truth about why we stay stuck. Because once you see clearly that something needs to change, the natural question becomes, why haven't I changed already? And the answer is rarely about lack of ability. It's about fear. Not the dramatic kind of fear that feels like danger, but the quiet, reasonable fear that disguises itself as logic. The kind that whispers instead of shouts. The kind that sounds like responsibility, practicality, or patience. Fear tells us to be careful. Fear tells us not to rock the boat. Fear tells us that what we have, even if it's unfulfilling, is better than risking what we might lose. So we build lives around managing fear rather than following purpose. We call it being realistic. We stay in jobs that drain us because they're stable. We stay in relationships that limit us because they're familiar. We stay in habits that numb us because they're easy. And slowly, comfort becomes a cage. The problem is not that people don't want more. The problem is that wanting more requires letting go of something first. Letting go of certainty, letting go of approval, letting go of the version of yourself that knows how to survive but not how to grow. We are taught, often from a young age, to value security over meaning, to fit in before we stand out, to be agreeable before we are honest. And over time, we internalize the idea that disruption is dangerous, even when the disruption is necessary for growth. So instead of changing, we justify. We tell ourselves stories to make staying feel noble. I'm doing this for my family. I should be grateful. Other people have it worse. This is just how life is. And those stories are powerful because they're not entirely false, but they're incomplete. Gratitude doesn't mean resignation. Responsibility doesn't mean self-erasure, and survival is not the same thing as fulfillment. Yet fear convinces us that questioning our path is selfish, that wanting more means we're ungrateful for what we already have. So we silence that inner voice, not because it's wrong, but because listening to it would require action. Another reason we stay stuck is identity. We become attached to who we've been, to the roles we play, to the labels people give us. And changing threatens those identities. If you've always been the reliable one, what happens when you say no? If you've always been the quiet one, what happens when you speak up? If you've always been the one who settles, what happens when you finally ask for more? Change doesn't just alter your circumstances. It challenges how others see you and how you see yourself. And that's terrifying because belonging feels safer than authenticity, even when belonging costs us our truth. So we choose predictability over possibility. We also stay stuck because we underestimate momentum. We think change has to be dramatic, that it requires a complete overhaul of our life, a perfect plan, a clear vision of the outcome. And because we can't see the whole path, we don't take the first step. We wait to feel ready. But readiness is not a feeling, it's a result. Confidence comes after action, not before it. Clarity comes from movement, not from thinking. Yet we convince ourselves that hesitation is preparation. It's not. Hesitation is fear wearing a thoughtful disguise, and fear thrives in isolation. It grows louder when we stay in our own heads, when we replay worst-case scenarios, when we imagine judgment before it ever happens. So we stay stuck not because change is impossible, but because staying feels safer than stepping into uncertainty. But here's the paradox. The same fear that keeps us where we are is the reason we're unhappy where we are, because fear protects us from short-term discomfort at the expense of long-term regret. And regret is heavier than fear. The longer we stay stuck, the more we normalize dissatisfaction. We stop expecting joy. We stop expecting alignment. We start measuring life by how little pain we can tolerate rather than how much meaning we can create. And that's when we truly lose. Not when we fail, but when we stop trying. The most dangerous place to be is not rock bottom. It's comfort without purpose. It's a life that looks fine on the outside but feels empty on the inside. Because nothing pushes you to change. Nothing forces a decision. You just drift until years pass. And one day you realize that the cost of staying was far greater than the risk of leaving ever would have been. Understanding why we stay stuck is not about blaming ourselves. It's about recognizing the Invisible forces at play, fear, comfort, identity, and false narratives all work together to keep us exactly where we are. But once you see them, they lose their power, because fear only controls what we don't examine. Comfort only traps what we don't question. Stories only define us if we keep believing them. And the moment you recognize that staying stuck is a choice, even an unconscious one, you reclaim your agency. You realize that change isn't about becoming someone new. It's about stopping the habits that keep you from being who you already are. And that realization sets the stage for everything that comes next. Because once you understand why you've been staying, you can finally decide consciously whether it's still worth the cost. Once you understand why you've been stuck, there is a shift that must happen if anything is truly going to change. It's not a shift in circumstances. It's not a shift in resources. It's a shift in ownership, because clarity without responsibility. Thank you changes nothing. Most people want change, but they don't want responsibility. They want different outcomes without different behaviors. They want a better future without confronting the choices that created the present. And as long as responsibility is outsourced to the past, to other people, to the system, progress remains impossible. Responsibility is not about blame. Blame looks backward. Responsibility looks forward. Blame says, "This happened to me." Responsibility says, "This is what I will do next." And that distinction is everything. We are all shaped by things we did not choose. The environment we grew up in, the opportunities we were given or denied, the experiences that left marks on us. Acknowledging those realities is important. Ignoring them would be dishonest, but staying there is dangerous. Because when we define ourselves solely by what happened to us, we give away our power to decide what happens next. Responsibility is the moment you stop waiting for permission. Scion. Permission from people who may never understand you. Permission from circumstances that may never be perfect. Permission from a version of yourself that feels ready. The truth is, no one is coming to hand you a green light, and the longer you wait for external validation, the longer your life stays on pause. Taking responsibility means accepting a difficult truth. Even if the situation is unfair, it is still yours to address. Even if the timing is inconvenient, it is still your move to make. Even if the path is unclear, it is still your decision to step forward. This is where many people resist. Because responsibility removes excuses. It removes the comfort of saying, "I can't," because it replaces it with, "I haven't because," and that's uncomfortable. Because once you admit that you have a choice, you also admit that your inaction has been a choice too, but that realization is not meant to crush you. It's meant to free you. Responsibility returns agency. It gives you back the steering wheel. It reminds you that while you can't control everything that happens, you can control how you respond, what you tolerate, and what you choose to build next. And the moment you take responsibility, your language changes. You stop saying, "They won't let me." You start saying, "What am I willing to risk?" You stop saying, "This is just how it is." You start saying, "Does this align with who I want to be?" This shift doesn't require confidence. It requires commitment. Commitment to act before certainty. Commitment to learn through action rather than waiting for mastery. Commitment to lead your own life even when no one is clapping. Responsibility also means understanding that motivation is unreliable. Feelings fluctuate. Energy comes and goes. If your progress depends on how you feel, it will always be inconsistent. So instead of waiting to feel inspired, responsible people build systems. They create boundaries. They make decisions in advance about what they will and will not accept. They don't ask, "Do I feel like doing this today?" They ask, "Is this the kind of person I've decided to be?" That's the power of responsibility. It turns values into behavior. It also forces you to confront a hard truth about change. Not everyone will support the new version of you. Some people benefit from you staying the same. Some people are comfortable with your silence. Some people prefer the VE, version of you that doesn't challenge the status quo. Taking responsibility means being willing to disappoint others rather than abandoning yourself. And that takes courage because we are wired for belonging. Rejection feels like danger. So when responsibility threatens our place in a group, we hesitate. But leadership of any kind, especially self-leadership, requires the willingness to stand alone before others follow. Responsibility doesn't mean you have all the answers. It means you're willing to be accountable for the outcome. It means if you fail, you learn. If you succeed, you grow. And either way, you move forward. This is where responsibility becomes empowering rather than heavy. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop blaming the past for the future you haven't built yet. You stop outsourcing your sense of direction. Instead, you begin to act in alignment, even in small ways. You make the difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. You take the first step. Instead of overthinking it, you choose progress over approval. And with each responsible action, something shifts internally. You begin to trust yourself. Not because everything works out, but because you prove through action that you can handle uncertainty, that you can adapt, that you can recover. Self-trust is built this way, not through affirmations, through evidence. Responsibility creates that evidence. And once you trust yourself, fear loses its grip. Comfort loses its control. You stop needing external permission because you've given it to yourself. This is the point where change stops being a concept and starts becoming a practice. Not dramatic, not perfect, consistent. Responsibility is choosing every day to act in a way that honors the future you say you want, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when no one is watching. Because the moment you stop waiting for someone else to fix your life is the moment you realize you were always the nay who could. Once responsibility is accepted, a new tension appears. It's no longer about whether change is possible. It's about what kind of life you're willing to choose. Because at the heart of every meaningful transformation is a trade-off. You don't get to keep everything the same and expect a different future. Every change asks a question. Will you choose comfort or will you choose purpose? Comfort is easy to understand. It feels safe. It feels familiar. It promises immediate relief. Purpose, on the other hand, is demanding. It asks for patience. It asks for discipline. It asks you to endure discomfort today for something you may not fully see yet. And this is where most people hesitate, not because they don't want a better life, but because they don't want to give up the ease of the present. Comfort tells you to stay quiet instead of speaking the truth. Comfort tells you to delay instead of decide. Comfort tells you to settle because it's good enough. And convincing because it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels reasonable. Purpose rarely does. Purpose challenges your habits. It disrupts routines. It requires you to say no to things that once felt harmless but no longer serve who you're becoming. And that resistance you feel, that friction, that's not a sign you're on the wrong path. It's a sign you're leaving the familiar. Choosing purpose doesn't mean abandoning all pleasure or stability. It means refusing to let short-term ease dictate long-term direction. Most people don't fail because they choose the wrong goal. They fail because they choose comfort in the moments that matter. They choose the extra hour of distraction over the uncomfortable work. They choose silence over the difficult conversation. They choose familiarity over growth. And each choice seems small, insignificant even. But direction is determined by repetition, not intention. Purpose is not a grand declaration. It's a series of small, aligned decisions. It's ing up and doing the thing you said matters, even when motivation is low. It's protecting your energy instead of giving it away to everything that asks. It's saying no to good options so you can say yes to the right one. This is where discipline becomes an act of self-respect, not punishment, not restriction, respect. When you choose purpose, you begin to ask different questions. Not what's easiest right now, but what will I be proud of later? Not how do I avoid discomfort, but what discomfort is worth it, because all paths involve struggle. The difference is whether the struggle leads somewhere meaningful. Comfort struggles keep you stuck. Purpose struggles move you forward. And here's the part few people talk about. Choosing purpose often feels lonely at first. When you stop participating in habits that everyone else accepts, you stand out. When you change your standards, you change the dynamics around you. And not everyone will understand that shift. Some will shun you. Some will mock you. Some will try to pull you back into what's familiar. Not because they're bad people, but because your growth challenges their comfort. Choosing purpose means being willing to walk alone for a while. It means trusting that alignment is more important than approval. It means understanding that belonging built on self-betrayal is not belonging at all. Purpose also requires patience. Results don't appear immediately. Progress can feel invisible. And without instant feedback, comfort starts calling again, offering quick rewards and easy escapes. This is where clarity matters. When you're clear on why something matters to you, endurance becomes possible. You stop measuring success by speed and start measuring it by direction. You understand that meaningful change compounds slowly and that consistency will always outperform intensity. Purpose teaches you to play the long game, to show up when no one is watching, to keep going when progress feels slow, to trust the process even when the outcome is uncertain. And over time, something shifts. What once felt uncomfortable becomes normal. What once felt difficult becomes discipline. What once felt lonely becomes aligned. You start to experience a different kind of satisfaction. Not the fleeting pleasure of comfort, but the deep fulfillment of living in integrity with yourself. You sleep differently. You think differently. You move with more intention. Because when your actions align with your values, life feels lighter, even when it's hard. Choosing purpose also sharpens your sense of priority. You become more selective, more intentional. You stop reacting to everything and start responding to what truly matters. You realize that energy is finite, time is limited, and where you invest both determines the quality of your life. Comfort wastes that investment, purpose honors it. And perhaps the most powerful shift of all is this: when you consistently choose purpose over comfort, your identity changes. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You start seeing yourself as someone who follows through. You stop doubting your ability to change. You start trusting your capacity to endure. And that identity becomes self-reinforcing. The more you act in alignment, the easier alignment becomes. This is not about perfection. It's about direction. You will still feel resistance. You will still be tempted by comfort. But the difference is you will no longer confuse ease with fulfillment. Because once you've tasted the clarity that comes from purpose, going back feels harder than moving forward. Choosing purpose over comfort is not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice, a quiet commitment you renew each time you choose growth over ease, truth over convenience, and meaning over momentary relief. And that choice, made consistently, is what transforms a life. Not overnight, but for good. After awareness, after understanding fear, after taking responsibility, After choosing purpose over comfort, there is only one thing left that separates intention from transformation: action. Not dramatic action, not perfect action. A first brave step? Most people overestimate what the first step should look like. They imagine a complete reinvention, a bold announcement, a flawless plan. And because the picture in their head feels overwhelming, they never begin. But change rarely starts with clarity, it starts with courage. The first step is not about knowing the entire path. It's about moving without certainty. It's about doing something small that aligns with who you've decided to become, even when fear is still present. Especially when fear is still present, because fear doesn't disappear before action. Fear fades because of action. Waiting to feel ready is one of the most common traps. Readiness feels responsible, it feels smart, but in reality, it's often resistance disguised as patience. No one feels ready to change their life. They feel compelled by exhaustion, compelled by misalignment, compelled by the quiet truth that staying the same is no longer an option. The first brave step is a declaration, not to the world, but to yourself. It says, I trust myself enough to begin, and that trust matters more than confidence ever will. Small actions carry disproportionate power. They break inertia. They turn thought into evidence. They create momentum, and momentum changes how you see yourself. You don't become confident and then act. You act, and confidence follows. You don't wait for belief. You build belief through behavior. This is why the first step must be simple enough to take, but meaningful enough to matter. Something that moves you 1 inch closer to alignment. One conversation, one boundary, one habit, one decision made differently than before. And once you take that step, something subtle but powerful happens. Your inner narrative shifts. You stop asking, can I do this? And start saying, I'm doing this. That shift changes everything. Momentum doesn't come from intensity. It comes from consistency, from showing up again and again, especially on days when progress feels invisible. This is where most people quit, not because they failed, but because the results didn't arrive fast enough. They confuse slow progress with no progress, and comfort offers an easy escape. But growth is quiet. It doesn't announce itself daily. It reveals itself over time. The people who change their lives are not the ones who never doubt. They're the ones who keep moving despite doubt. They don't wait for certainty. They act in alignment and allow clarity to catch up. The first step also teaches you something important. You are more capable than you think. When you do the thing you were avoiding, you realize the fear was louder than the reality. The anticipation was heavier than the experience. And each time you survive what once scared you, your threshold expands. Tease how courage compounds. Action also creates feedback. It shows you what works and what doesn't. And unlike overthinking, feedback is useful. You adjust, you refine, you learn. Progress is not linear. There will be setbacks, days when you slip back into old habits, moments when comfort tempts you again. That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're human. The difference now is awareness. You notice the drift sooner. You correct course faster. You stop turning temporary setbacks into permanent stories about who you are. The first brave step also builds self-respect. Every time you act in alignment, you send yourself a message, I keep my word to me. And self-respect grows from evidence, not intention. You don't need external validation when you trust yourself. You don't need applause when you know you're moving in the right direction. Over time, your identity shifts again. You stop seeing yourself as someone who wants change. You start seeing yourself as someone who creates. That identity is powerful. It influences your decisions. It raises your standards. It makes certain behaviors incompatible with who you've become. And what once required effort becomes instinct. The first step also reminds you that change is not a single moment. It's a practice. A series of choices made consistently over time. Some days the step will be obvious. Some days it will be uncomfortable. Some days it will be as simple as not quitting. And that counts because perseverance is a form of courage too. Eventually, the fear that once controlled you becomes information rather than a barrier. You don't wait for it to disappear. You learn to walk with it, and that's when you realize something profound. You were never waiting for motivation. You were waiting for permission. And the moment you took the first brave step, you gave it to yourself. Enough is not a feeling. It's a commitment to act even when it's hard, to move even when the path unclear, to choose growth even when comfort is calling. The first step doesn't guarantee success, but it guarantees movement. And movement, consistent, intentional movement, is what turns change from an idea into a life. So take the step. Not when you're fearless, but when you're ready to stop standing still, because the life you want is not built in one leap. It's built the moment you decide to begin and refuse to stop. There comes a point when all the thinking, all the waiting, and all the convincing must come to an end. Because awareness without action is just another form of comfort. And comfort, no matter how familiar, will never take you where purpose lives. This journey begins with a simple truth. Change is not something that happens to you, it is something you choose. You recognize the moment when staying the same became more painful than stepping forward. You understood why fear and familiarity kept you stuck. You accepted responsibility instead of waiting for permission. Scion. You chose purpose over comfort, and finally, you took that first brave step. That sequence matters. Because real change is not built on motivation. Motivation fades. Real change is built on identity. On the decision to become the kind of person who does not abandon themselves when things get difficult. The kind of person who listens when that inner voice says, this is not enough anymore. Enough is not a dramatic declaration to the world. It is a quiet promise to yourself. A promise that you will no longer trade your future for short-term ease. A promise that you will no longer wait for perfect conditions before honoring what matters to you. You don't need certainty to move forward. You need commitment. Commitment to show up even when progress feels slow. Commitment to act even when fear is still present. Commitment to keep choosing alignment over approval. The truth is, the life you want is not far away. It is built one decision at a time, one boundary, one habit, one moment where you choose growth instead of comfort. And those moments, repeated consistently, reshape your direction. There will be days when it feels hard. Days when old patterns call you back. Days when the easy option looks tempting again. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're changing, and change is uncomfortable by nature. What matters is not perfection, but persistence. Because every time you act in alignment with who you want to become, you strengthen trust in yourself. And self-trust is the foundation of confidence, resilience, and leadership in your own life. So if you leave with one thing, let it be this: you are not stuck. You are simply standing at a decision point. And the moment you choose to move, even imperfectly, everything begins to shift. Enough is not the end of who you were, it is the beginning of who you are becoming. And decision made today and honored tomorrow is what changes everything.